We are tired of being the world's policeman. We are tired of paying for other people's wars. You have heard the soundbites playing on a loop for nearly a decade. You have seen the rallies where the mere mention of foreign aid draws boos from the crowd. For 8 years, the America First movement has hammered home a singular, unyielding message. The United States is being ripped off by its so-called friends. Donald Trump has built a political empire on threatening to withdraw from NATO, labeling it obsolete. He has publicly shamed Germany, the supposed leader of Europe, for shutting down its nuclear plants and buying Russian gas, all while expecting the U.S. Marines to defend the Fulda Gap. He has stared down South Korea and demanded they pay billions more for the privilege of hosting U.S. troops, treating the deployment like a real estate lease rather than a security pact. To the MAGA faithful, the post-war order is just a giant GoFundMe campaign where America pays and everyone else benefits. But notice who is missing from that hit list? In thousands of speeches, tweets, and interviews, notice the one major ally that never gets the freeloader lecture? Australia. While Washington tears up treaties, imposes tariffs on allies, and questions the fundamental value of the liberal international order, the alliance with Australia has never been stronger. It is an anomaly. In fact, under the harsh, America First lens, Australia isn't just an ally, Australia is the prototype. What? Because in the brutal, ledger-based calculus of a businessman president, Australia is the only country that understands the art of the deal. Europe comes to Washington asking for a handout or a security guarantee. Australia comes to Washington to make a purchase. Europe is a liability on the balance sheet. Australia is an asset. Welcome to Doctrine of War. Today we are dissecting the geopolitical reality that the mainstream media ignores. The common narrative, peddled by think tanks in London and Paris, is that a nationalist, inward-looking America is a disaster for Australia. The fear is palpable. If Trump returns to the White House or if his isolationist ideology continues to dominate the Pentagon, Australia will be left alone in the Pacific, abandoned by a superpower that no longer cares about the periphery. We are here to tell you the exact opposite is true. The America First doctrine isn't about isolationism, it is about return on investment, ROI. It is about cutting losses on bad investments and doubling down on good ones. And right now, Australia is providing the best ROI of any nation on Earth. We are going to break down the financial, strategic, and industrial reasons why the road to making America great again runs directly through Canberra. We'll show you why the Australian checkbook speaks louder than European diplomacy, and why in a transactional world, being a paying customer is the ultimate security guarantee. To understand why the Republican strategic mind respects Australia, you have to follow the money. And there is a lot of money to follow. For decades, the European model of alliance was based on shared values and historical sentiment. NATO members would attend summits, talk poetically about democracy and human rights, and toast to the bonds of history. But when the bill came due, they would quietly slash their defense budgets to fund their social welfare states, relying on the US taxpayer to cover the gap in hard power. Germany, the economic engine of Europe, spent years effectively dismantling its military while the US kept 30,000 troops on German soil to deter Russia. To a transactionalist like Donald Trump, this isn't an alliance, it's a welfare program. It is a protection racket where the client refuses to pay. Now look at Australia. In 2021, Australia signed the AUKUS agreement. The global headlines focused on the nuclear technology, the reactors, the stealth, the range. But the fine print, the part that made eyes light up in the US Congress and the boardrooms of the military-industrial complex, was the price tag, $368 billion. This is not American aid money flowing to Australia. This is not a foreign military financing grant. This is Australian taxpayer money flowing into the United States. Australia is not asking the US Navy to park submarines in Perth out of the goodness of their hearts. Australia is paying for the privilege. As part of the deal, Australia is contributing $3 billion directly into the US submarine industrial base. Let's be very specific about what that means. That is Australian cash being used to upgrade dry docks in Pearl Harbor. It is Australian money building new training facilities in Groton, Connecticut. It is Australian capital being used to hire and train American welders, American nuclear engineers, and American steelworkers in Newport News. Australia is effectively subsidizing the modernization of the US Navy's own supply chain. To an America First strategist, this is the perfect alliance. It is the platonic ideal of foreign relations. Australia isn't a dependent child asking for an allowance. Australia is a VIP customer placing the largest pre-order in the history of the defense industry. Think about the optical difference this makes in the Oval Office. When a European leader visits Washington, they usually come with a list of requests. Please keep your troops here, please don't put tariffs on our cars, please help us with logistics in the Sahel. They are asking for American resources. When the Australian Prime Minister visits, they come with a checkbook. They are there to finalize contracts. They are there to inject liquidity into the American manufacturing sector. This completely flips the power dynamic. By becoming a paying customer, Australia transforms itself from a security dependent into a security partner. The Virginia-class submarines that Australia is buying will be fully integrated into the US battle network. They will use US weapons, US sensors, and US logistics. But more importantly, the deal solves a critical domestic problem for the America First camp. They want a strong military, but they hate the national debt. They want to confront China, but they don't want the US taxpayer to bear the entire cost of the buildup. AUKUS is the solution. It allows the US to project power into the Indo-Pacific using Australian capital to build the hulls and maintain the fleet. Furthermore, this deal locks the two economies together for 50 years. You cannot cancel a nuclear submarine program on a whim. It isn't like canceling a trade deal. It creates a level of industrial intimacy that simply does not exist with NATO. A German Leopard tank operates independently of the US Army. An Australian SS AUKUS is essentially a node in the US Navy's kill chain, dependent on US reactors and US combat systems. This is why, despite all the rhetoric about isolationism, you will never see a Republican president tear up the Australian alliance. You don't fire your biggest customer. You don't alienate the guy who is paying to upgrade your factories in swing states. The America First doctrine is often accused of being mercenary. Critics say it reduces diplomacy to a business transaction. If that's true, then Australia is the highest bidder. And in a world of transactional diplomacy, money talks louder than shared heritage, common language, or the memories of wars fought a century ago. If you are starting to see why the narrative of US isolationism is a myth when it comes to the Pacific, and why cash acts as the ultimate geopolitical glue, hit that like button and subscribe to Doctrine of War. We cut through the political noise to show you the hard realities of money, iron, and blood that actually drive global strategy. Your support keeps us independent and realistic. But money is only half the equation. The other half is industry. The core tenet of the America First platform is reindustrialization. The goal is to bring manufacturing jobs back home, to smash the Rust Belt stigma, and to decouple the US economy from China. The strategic nightmare for Washington is that the US military is dependent on its greatest enemy for the components of its own weapons. This is where Australia transforms from a customer into a lifeline. You cannot build an F-35 fighter jet without rare earth elements. You cannot build a Ford-class aircraft carrier without specialized alloys. You cannot build the millions of electric vehicles that the US auto industry wants to sell without lithium, cobalt, and nickel. For the last 20 years, China has cornered the market on these materials. They don't just mine them, they process them. This gives Beijing a kill switch on the American economy. If Xi Jinping decided tomorrow to ban the export of processed rare earths, the US defense industry would grind to a halt within months. This is an intolerable vulnerability for a nationalist US administration. They need a supply chain that is secure, scalable, and politically reliable. Enter Australia. Australia is the world's largest producer of lithium. It holds some of the largest reserves of cobalt, vanadium, and rare earths on the planet. It is practically a continent made of the specific elements required to fight a 21st century war. But here is the key distinction. Unlike countries in Africa or South America where Chinese state-owned enterprises have bought up all the mines, Australia has actively blocked Chinese investment in critical minerals. Canberra has signaled to Washington, "We are your quarry. We are your strategic reserve." Under the compact regarding climate, critical minerals, and clean energy transformation, Australia is integrating its mining sector directly with the US industrial base. The Pentagon is effectively treating Australian mines as if they were on US soil. This gives Australia leverage that Europe can only dream of. Germany makes cars. France makes luxury goods. Australia makes the ingredients for the American future. If the US wants to win the trade war with China, it needs Australian dirt. It needs Australian supply chains. This makes the alliance fail-safe. Even if a US president wanted to pull back from the world, they couldn't pull back from Australia without crashing their own industrial sector. The America First strategy is about self-sufficiency. But total self-sufficiency is a myth. The United States lacks the domestic reserves to power its own green transition or its own missile production. The next best thing to Made in America is mined in Australia. This creates a relationship of mutual necessity. The US provides the nuclear umbrella. Australia provides the raw materials to build the umbrella. It is a perfect closed loop. The anti-China alignment. Money and minerals are tangible assets. But there is a psychological component to the America First worldview that is equally important. It is an obsession with strength and a disdain for weakness. The MAGA movement views the world as a rough neighborhood. They respect leaders who stand up for themselves, and they despise those who apologize. They look at Europe with its nuanced diplomacy and its attempts to de-risk rather than decouple from China, and they see weakness. They see French President Macron flying to Beijing to sign Airbus deals while China threatens Taiwan. They see Germany paralyzed by its dependence on Chinese consumers for its Volkswagen sales. To a US hawk, Europe is hedging. They are trying to play both sides, keeping the US security guarantee while taking Chinese cash. Then they look at Australia. In 2020, Australia became the canary in the coal mine for the entire Western world. When the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, Australia was the first nation to demand an independent inquiry into the origins of the virus. Beijing's response was furious. They launched a campaign of massive economic coercion. They slapped tariffs on Australian barley, wine, beef, and coal. Their diplomats issued a list of 14 grievances, demanding that Australia silence its press and change its foreign policy if it wanted trade to resume. It was a naked attempt to bully a middle power into submission. Most countries would have folded. The conventional wisdom was that Australia, which sent 40% of its exports to China, would have to apologize. The economic pain would be too great. But Australia didn't blink. Canberra told Beijing to pound sand. They diversified their trade, absorbed the economic hit, and stood their ground. They were the first to ban Huawei from their 5G network, years before other nations followed suit. They passed foreign interference laws that targeted Chinese influence operations. This resonated deeply in Washington. For the America First crowd, this wasn't just foreign policy, it was a character test. Australia proved it had a spine. When Republicans look at the map of allies, they see a lot of fair-weather friends. But in Australia, they see a nation that took the first punch from the dragon and stayed standing. This shared threat perception is the glue of the alliance. The America First doctrine identifies the Chinese Communist Party as the existential threat to the American way of life. It seeks to dismantle the trade imbalances and the theft of intellectual property. Australia is the only ally that has fully internalized this reality. While European leaders talk about China as a systemic rival, but also a partner, Australian defense papers talk about the loss of strategic warning time and the probability of conflict. Australia is on a war footing. Europe is on a lunch break. This alignment of worldviews makes communication easy. There is no need for US diplomats to convince Canberra that China is dangerous. The Australians are the ones telling the Americans to hurry up. This anti-China credential gives Australia a unique status in the White House. It isn't treated as a subordinate that needs to be lectured, it is treated as a fellow combatant in the trenches. When Trump talks about winning against China, he knows he can't do it with French diplomacy. He needs Australian grit. There is also a cultural dimension here that gets overlooked. The America First movement is, at its core, a Western nationalist movement. It champions the Anglosphere, the English language, and the heritage of Western democracy. Australia fits this cultural mold perfectly. It is an English-speaking, Five Eyes partner with a history of fighting alongside the US in every major conflict of the last century. From Hamel to Hugh City, from Uruzgan to the Euphrates, Australian diggers have bled alongside American GIs. This history matters to the populist right in America. They value loyalty above almost everything else. The sentiment is, when we went to Vietnam, the Australians came. When we went to Iraq, the Australians came. The French complained, the Germans lectured, but the Australians showed up. This creates a reservoir of goodwill that transcends specific policies. It means that even when there are trade disputes, like tariffs on steel or aluminum, Australia almost always gets an exemption. The US administration views Australia as family, while Europe is viewed as acquaintances. Furthermore, the political trends in Australia mirror the concerns of the US right. Debates about sovereignty, border control, and national identity are front and center in Australian politics. The Operation Sovereign Borders policy, which effectively stopped illegal boat arrivals, is often cited by US Republicans as a model for their own border wall. So, you have an economic alignment, minerals, a military alignment, AUKUS, a strategic alignment, China, and a cultural alignment, Western values. It is a quadruple lock. While the media focuses on the personality clashes, whether a specific prime minister gets along with the president, the structural forces pushing the US and Australia together are unstoppable. The America First train is leaving the station, and Australia is the only ally that bought a first-class ticket. The Pacific redoubt. Finally, we must return to the hardest reality of all, geography. The America First strategy is often described as Fortress America. The idea is to pull back from overextended commitments and defend the homeland. But in the age of intercontinental ballistic missiles, defending the homeland requires a buffer zone. As we have discussed on this channel before, the traditional American buffer zone, the first island chain, Japan, Philippines, is crumbling. It is within range of thousands of cheap Chinese missiles. Guam, the linchpin of the second island chain, is a sitting duck. If the US wants to maintain dominance in the Pacific without exposing its core assets to immediate destruction, it needs a fallback position. It needs a Pacific redoubt. Australia is that redoubt. Look at the map through the eyes of a Pentagon strategist. Australia is a massive, unsinkable aircraft carrier anchored in the southern hemisphere. It is far enough away from China to be difficult to hit with conventional missiles, but close enough to project power into the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. The US isn't expanding its presence in Darwin and Tyndall and Perth just to be nice to Australia. They are doing it because they need a garage for their toys that isn't on fire. They need a place to park their B-52 bombers where they won't be cratered on the runway in the first 10 minutes of a war. They need a place to repair their nuclear submarines that is out of range of carrier-killer missiles. They need a place to store the millions of gallons of fuel required to fight a high-intensity conflict. Under the America First logic, this makes Australia an extension of the American defense perimeter. Protecting Australia isn't foreign aid, it is self-preservation. If Australia falls or if Australia becomes neutral, the US gets pushed back to Hawaii. The Pacific becomes a Chinese lake. This geographic necessity drives the force posture initiatives. It explains why the US is funding infrastructure upgrades in northern Australia. They are building the fortress that they will need to retreat to if the first island chain collapses. This is the ultimate guarantee of the alliance. It isn't based on friendship. It isn't based on treaties signed in 1951. It is based on the cold, hard fact that the US military cannot fight a war in the Pacific without Australian real estate. So, what does this mean for the average Australian? It means the days of the cultural cringe are over. Australia is no longer a junior partner begging for attention. Australia is the landlord and the US is the tenant. And the tenant is renovating the house. This gives Canberra incredible agency. The narrative that Australia is a puppet of the US misses the point. A puppet does what it's told because it is weak. A partner collaborates because it is strong. Australia has successfully positioned itself as the indispensable nation in the Indo-Pacific. By locking the US into AUKUS, by integrating the supply chains, and by opening up its geography, Australia has ensured that its security is indistinguishable from American security. To the America First crowd, this is the only way an alliance should work. You contribute, you pay your way, you provide value, and in return, you get the full weight of the American superpower behind you. Europe, with its aging populations, shrinking militaries, and ambivalent foreign policies, represents the past. It is a museum that the US is tired of paying the admission fee for. Australia, with its resources, its strategic geography, and its willingness to fight, represents the future. It is the frontier. The Trump-Pacific Plan isn't written down in a single document. It is emerging from the actions of the US government across multiple administrations. And the plan is clear: pivot away from the stagnation of the Atlantic and build a new fortress in the Pacific. Australia is the foundation of that fortress. The next time you hear a commentator say that America First means America alone, remember the $368 billion. Remember the lithium mines. Remember the B-52s in Tyndall. America is not going home. It is moving house. It is moving its strategic center of gravity south. For Australia, this is both a massive opportunity and a massive risk. We are placing all our chips on the American alliance. We are betting that the US can and will remain the dominant power in the region. But under the America First doctrine, this is the only bet that makes sense. Because in a world of transactionalist superpowers, you are either at the table or you are on the menu. Australia has bought its seat at the head of the table. Thanks for watching Doctrine of War. Do you think Australia's all-in strategy with the US is the right move, or are we tying ourselves too closely to a volatile partner? Let us know in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay realistic, and we'll see you in the next one.